Council, David Goldman, Finance Director. So today we're going to talk about level of service for our two public safety departments, fire and police, and some opportunities and options to look at in order to fund a higher level of service for those two major functions of the city. So the order of presentation today, we'll be talking about fire, police, funding methods, funding options, a timing of either a potential levy or a sales tax proposal, and outreach methods that we'll be utilizing. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to our fire chief to talk about the current level of fire services and what are some options to increase those services. Go ahead, Ray.
All right, thanks. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Ray Merrill, Fire Chief, your favorite fire chief, by the way, just so we know. Dave's going to have to move the slides forward for me. I plan on talking. How much time do I have, Mayor?
You have 30 minutes.
30 minutes, just for mine?
No, you have 2 minutes. Just kidding.
All right. Captain Bailey only needs about 30 seconds, so I'm going to take the rest of the time. So how did we get here? This is the question. Why are we asking for this? And I'm going to say again, and I would ask if you have questions, please ask while I've got the slide up, because then it's going to be easier to explain what's going on. So how did we get here? Dave?
All right,
here we go. So back in 1990, you can see what our population base was, about 17,000 people. You can see that we were 3.3 square miles. We had 2 firefighters. That would have been Chief Soptic and myself at the time. And then in 2000, our population base did go up a little bit. And we did have a big jump in fire service personnel up to 10. So we had a real hiring boom from 1990 to the 2000. 2010, you can see again our population has increased. The size has increased again up to 9.42 square miles. You can see the number of homes. And we still have those same 10 firefighters. So from 2010, there wasn't an increase. And in 2020, you can see the number of homes, the population base, the size of the square footage. And we were able to secure a new lieutenant's position because I came in mid-budget cycle and explained that we just could not continue on the path that we were going with our growth and the number of people that we had and the number of staffing that we had. And yes?
I'm looking at 2 firefighters for 17,000. Obviously, you mentioned there's that bump. Were you really strapped with only 2 firefighters? I mean, you go up 2,000, you get, 80% more. So.
Excellent question. Back in 1990, we had a very robust volunteer group. And back in those days, we had people that worked for the city that could leave their city job and come work for the fire department. We had local business owners that would let their people leave to come to work. In fact, your predecessor at the funeral home was one of those individuals. We had other individuals within the city that owned businesses that could leave and come down at a moment's notice. So we had a very robust volunteer program. As we know, that's changed over the years. Volunteerism, we know, is declining in the nation, and we are seeing the results of that. So we're talking career staff here. We're going to talk paid on call here in just a little bit. Dave? So we know we've grown a lot. And I like these 2 slides because this is what we looked like in 1990. And you can see a lot of grass and green area, and then look at what it looks like in 2020 of all the growth that has occurred. And you can see where all the new growth, the new subdivisions. We go to the next slide, and you're going to see some bright colors. And that is all growth since 1990 within the city limits and a little bit on the Navy base. Why do we bring up the Navy base? Because we provide mutual aid services to the Navy as they provide services to us. I'll go ahead, Dave. So when we look at what we're required to do by Survey and Rating Bureau, and we had Fair and Pierce come out and do a feasibility study, and we look at that 24% of our homes in 2020 were outside of our service area. And I'm going to talk about service area here in just a little bit. Go ahead, Dave. You can see it's 1.5 miles. I'm going to talk more about that in depth. And we can see that the growth is going out in that southwest area. Back in 2006, we had a company come up and do a strategic plan for us. And one thing they mentioned in there was that an additional fire station was needed in the southwest quadrant. So this is nothing new. We've brought this up numerous times. We know that it's got to happen at some point. We know that we started collecting some fire fees way back when. And we know that we didn't spend those fire fees soon enough, so we had to refund all that fire fee money that was collected back to the property owners. We gave back a little over $80,000 from that fire fee that we weren't able to utilize. Go ahead, Dave. And we know that since 2006, we have annexed 216 acres of land, give or take just a little bit. So we've done a lot of annexation, but we as the fire department have not grown to cover that annexation. So way back in 2006, they knew we needed to do something. 2016, we did our response analysis, and that 24% of our call volume is not within the 4-minute or 1.5-mile radius as established by Survey and Rating Bureau and NFPA 1710, which I'll talk about here just in a little bit. Go ahead, Dave. We know that our largest gap is in that southwest quadrant. We know the growth is going that direction. When Fair and Pierce did their survey, they came up with 4 potential sites in the southwest area. A couple of those sites have already been taken and sold and utilized by somebody else. And we know that that southwest station is going to be needed to meet the future response standards. And we know the growth's going out there. We know there's 500 new homes coming in here in the very near future that we're going to have to protect. Go ahead, Dave. So we're going to talk a little bit about ratings. What do these ratings mean? And, we talk about response times, and this comes out of NFPA 1710, which says there's a state of normalcy. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. And then somebody finds out there's something wrong. There's an initiation and the discovery of the event. Then we start talking about alarm handling time and response time. So let's say an automatic fire alarm activates. That alarm goes to a central station. They have 90 seconds to process that alarm and send that information to our ICOM dispatch center. ICOM has 90 seconds to process that and dispatch it. So we're already behind by 3 minutes from the initiation of the alarm. Then we get our turnout time, what it takes us to turn out, to get into our gear, get into our apparatus, our travel time. And if you've ever been out on the highway on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, you know it's just a little backed up now and then. When we get to the scene, we have our intervention time and then control and mitigation. So we look at what our total response is from the time we get the call until we get on the scene that we're able to mitigate the hazard. There's parameters that we try to shoot for. This is the breakdown of that cascade of events, and I'm going to talk about that response time here in just a little bit. There's a couple misnomers about it that I'd like to clear up. Go ahead, Dave. So Washington Survey and Rating Bureau rates the city. They like to do it every 5 years. The last time we were rated was back in 2013. And they are an independent agency that deals with the insurance agencies. And the intent is they're going to come out and evaluate us. They look at our equipment. We've got really good equipment. We really, really do. You come to the station, you look at our apparatus and our equipment, it's really good. There's no doubt about it. We look at fire department operations. We've got a great water system. The water department over the years has done a fabulous job boosting our water flow and our fire flow up to what we have today. Our 911 center is absolutely fantastic. We get very good ratings from 911. So we use all this stuff from Survey and Rating Bureau, and the insurance companies looks at that and they say, here's your rating. Go ahead, Dave. What we can control is the fire department operations. How do we make it better? So we're currently a class 4, which is a very good rating, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best. We were evaluated in 2013. We were shooting for a class 3, and we barely missed getting to it, so we remained a class 4. This slide comes from last year, and I said that in 2021, if we were re-rated then, we would likely drop to a 5, because we talk about fire department operations, and the biggest place we got hit was our response time, our travel distance, our 1.5-mile radius, and our lack of staffing. Those are all things that we can control. So we take a look at the standards. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead and bring it on up. So In 2020, our average response time was 5 minutes and 54 seconds. Our turnout time was 2 minutes and 54 seconds, and that's an increase from the previous year. So why such a big increase? Why does that turnout time change? Well, we have 17% of our time we're having concurrent calls, which means our engine company is already out somewhere else. We get a second call, we have to wait for our paid-on-call staff to come in, or we send a vehicle out with just one person, or we call from mutual aid from the Navy, or we call from mutual aid from North Whidbey Fire and Rescue. That all plays a role into that response time. If we can't get out the door in that 80 seconds and it takes 4 minutes for us to get out the door, that goes against our turnout time. Then we take a look at our incidents at 7 minutes and 15 seconds. According to NFPA 1710, which we have to follow, we should be able to get our travel time in 4 minutes or less. The council years ago established 4 minutes for medical, 5 minutes for fire, and as you can see, we don't meet the standards that we have established, and that at only 39% of our time are we compliant in our turnout time at 80 seconds or less. Medical, we're at 5 minutes and 9 seconds. Our travel time, 68% compliant. And again, for those same reasons, again, with multiple calls, or just the distance that we have to travel. Again, if we have to go from our station on Whidbey all the way out to Howard's Point, which is 3.5 miles away from our station, and drive through traffic at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, we'll never hit our response time, ever. So growth is really impacting the service that we can provide. And when we look at this, 7 minutes and 15 seconds for the average for the entire city, yeah, we can go 2 blocks from the station in 30 seconds, but if you're waiting and your house is on fire and you live out on Sunnyside Boulevard and it takes 9 minutes to get there, those are some long, long 9 minutes to wait when you're watching your house burn. Go ahead, Dave. So again, we look at 1710. It says our first engine should arrive in scene 4 minutes or less, 90% of the time with an 80-second turnout time. Go ahead, Dave. And again, we're at 7 minutes and 15 seconds as of 2020. We may have seen it even go down in 2021. Go ahead, Dave. And I hope this picture loads. This is a really cool video to watch. This is a response time that we had in under 4 minutes at an apartment house complex last year. And take a look at the fire at 4 minutes when we got there. This is a 3-story apartment complex, and you notice the apartment complex to the east was on fire as well. So the main complex was on fire, the radiant heat ignited the second one. We responded with a 3-person engine company and a command officer to this. And you're going to watch, our guys did a fabulous job putting water on this thing. And you got to realize it takes time to stretch that hose line out, get connected to the hydrant, get the water supply going. You can see the water starting to flow here. Making a quick exterior attack on the building that's on fire. Fortunately, there were no major injuries. There were some minor injuries. The guy that lived in the very bottom apartment had some cuts and bruises and some scrapes getting him outside of the building. It looks like our video's buffering just a little bit, but you can see that they're making a quick attack from the outside, and then the rest of our crew has taken hose lines around to get in from the interior of the fire. We utilized mutual aid from NAS Whidbey and mutual aid from North Whidbey Fire and Rescue in order to attack this fire. He did swing around and was able to knock the fire out on the apartment just to the east and kept that as an exterior fire. But this was a 4-minute response time during the middle of the day. Imagine if this fire would have come in at 2 o'clock in the morning and we had a 7-minute response time. The outcome would have been totally different. Go ahead, Dave, let's move on. We had some buffering on that. But you can see how and there is spraying over to the apartment on the east. And there was a good 20 feet separation between those two buildings, but the amount of radiant heat ignited that second building. All right, let's go ahead and move on, Dave. So our response standards say that we're going to respond with 2 EMTs. We should respond in 4 minutes or less, 90% of the time, and we're at 5:09. A couple things that changed here is in 2020, we had to change our methodology. It used to be in the good old days, if you had a medical call, you got in the rescue unit and you took off and went. In today's standard now, depending on the type of call, we've got to put a gown on, we've got to put gloves on, we've got to put eye protection on, you might have to put hoodies on. You know, there's more stuff that we have to do to get out the door before we respond in comparison to the days have gone by. Go ahead, Dave. So NFPA 1710 says that we should have a minimum staffing of firefighters of 4 on an engine company, 4 on the ladder truck, 5 if it's a high-rise building, and 1 command officer. And ideally, we should have 2 engine companies, a ladder truck, a command officer, an intervention crew, and a safety officer. Go ahead, Dave, for the first 2 assignment. There are multiple times throughout the week that we only have a 3-person engine company for all of the city of Oak Harbor. That's it. So we should have 16 people as a minimum before we enter inside of a building unless there is a known life hazard. There are some requirements under WAC 296-305 that says 2 in and 2 out unless it's a known life hazard. We treat every fire as a known or as an unknown life hazard. We don't know if somebody's in there or not, and we're going to treat it as there could be, because we've gone to fires where people have said there's nobody in there, and we've gone in and found a deceased person. We found people inside of the structure that shouldn't have been there. So we are more aggressive than 296-305, but we believe we're going to go in and look to make sure there's not anybody in that building. Go ahead, Dave. But again, you can see that our first 2 assignment, with only a 3-person engine company, we're really stretching it. Again, 3.2 miles to Howard's Point. We look at the number of people that we have on the station, a 1.5-mile radius to be in our standards, so we far exceed that 1.5-mile radius. We take a look at our staffing. We have 11 full-time career firefighters. When this slide was made, we had 32 paid on call. Right now, we're down to about 22. We had some people that got transferred. We had 3 or 4 people that didn't want to get vaccinated, that did not want to get the exemptions, so they left the department. We've taken on some new staff, but they're in the training process, so we can't use them yet. We do get a 3-to-1 credit from Survey and Rating Bureau for our paid on call. Our city standards are go ahead, Dave. Our city standards that established by City Council is going to say 4 minutes for medical and 5 minutes for fire. We don't even meet the standards that have been established by the council. Go ahead, Dave. Talk a little bit about staffing. When we take a look at our comparables, and I think this is a really interesting comparable staffing, we operate with 1/4 to 1/3 fewer firefighters compared to our comparable cities in the state. Go ahead, Dave. And we're waiting for this to load. So we have 11 full-time. Our comparables have 28. And go ahead, Dave. And when you break that down per 1,000, we run with 0.45 per 1,000 population compared to our comparables at 1.25 per 1,000 population. So we run really thin in comparison to the comparables that we utilize. Mr. Stuckey.
Does this take into account volunteers and paid on call?
This takes just into account our career staff.
So do those comparable cities have more or less the same paid on call part-time? You have any idea?
Burlington's got paid on call, Aberdeen's got volunteers, Anacortes just revised their paid on call program. So yes, we're comparing career to career, not paid on call to paid on call, because that number fluctuates so much. But most of these cities that you see up on the top do have volunteers and or paid on call as well. So we try to make it a 1-to-1 comparison. Go ahead, Dave. So when we take a look at minimum staffing, there are multiple days and or nights that we have 3 firefighters on and 1 command officer for the entire city of 23,000 people. If we've got a full staffing complement during the work week, we've got a command officer, we've got 4 firefighters on the engine company, and you notice that on that rescue truck, there's a chief fire officer and a deputy chief. So Mike and I are leaving our jobs to ride the rescue during the day if we need to, which is fine. And we will take command if we need to. Ideal staffing during the day, 7 days a week, would be the chief, deputy chief, a command officer, 4 on the engine, and 2 firefighters on the rescue. so we can put our firefighters where they need to be. And again, we talk about the minimum staffing of 16 before entering firefighting into interior structure firefighting. Go ahead, Dave. And I've already talked a little bit about our 32 paid on call, our 11 full-time career, 32 paid on call. We did just recently promote one person to a lieutenant's position because we got some ARPA funding, thanks to Mr. Goldman. He was able to provide that for us. So we have hired one additional firefighter that's going to start on March 1st. And you can see what our shift looks like, day shift and night shift. During the day, 7 to 7, a chief for command, a deputy chief for command, the training officer for command, a full-time captain that's on day shift, 2 firefighters, and a paid on call during the day shift. Now, just imagine, though, our captain is on a Kelly day or on a vacation day or on a sick day. One of our firefighters has to move up to fill that captain's position, which means now we're down to a 2 or 3 person crew once again. So far this month, we've had 8 days that we've had to cover overtime because two of our captains were out on COVID and 1 firefighter was out on COVID. So I've used a good third of my overtime budget for all of 22 in the month of January, and we're not done yet. And then our night shift, we've got 1 captain for command and 4 paid on-call firefighters. And that's on a good night if we have 4. Most of the time, we're running 3. Go ahead, Dave.
All right, and a quick correction. The ARPA funding came through an act of Congress. It wasn't my doing.
But you gave it to me. You passed it along.
That was a decision by the city council, but yes, I did provide them options and information. But yes, thank you. Next slide.
It's a little slow moving, isn't it? So it's interesting, when you look at the staffing, 9 full-time firefighters, we've got an average 18 years of service for all of us. There's 2 of us that are over 30 years, 2 that are over 20 years. You take a look at our leave bank, we've got over 9,500 hours of leave, so we don't abuse the leave that we get, the sick leave and or our vacation time. And in the next 3 years, 50% of our career staff could retire. There's a couple of us right now that could retire any day that we want. But one of us is staying here a long time, we hope. And I won't say which one that is, but he's kind of sitting over on this side of the table. He's planning on going to 50 years. So we're moving forward. But the problem that we run into with the size of our department is we don't have a way to have good succession planning to replace those 5 positions in the next 3 to 5 years. So, that's something that we have to look at as well. Go ahead, Dave. And you can see the work schedule. Every place that there's a yellow mark, one of the captains is off for Kelly days. Then we come back and fill it with either the floater lieutenant or one of the senior firefighters, or we just operate short-staffed, or we get very creative. And our training captain, Captain Anderson, may work a 24-hour shift, and we flex some time for him later on. Chief Buxton works 24-hour shifts, so we flex his schedule. Chief Merrill works 24-hour shifts, and we don't flex his schedule, but we do actually. But it's all good. It's what we have to do. Go ahead, Dave. And then take a look at our paid on call. We've got 32 paid on call. We're down to 22 about right now. We know that they self-determine their work schedule. They sign up for shifts per month. They can drop or trade shifts as needed. They're a good, reliable force, but things in their lives change, so they may drop a shift. Other people pick it up. Go ahead, Dave. And this is from August of last year, and every place there's a yellow mark, we were down to a 3-person company. Go ahead, Dave. So it takes 5 of our paid on call to fill all the shifts 7 days a week. We lost 1 person in August, and we now had 28 vacant shifts in the month of August. New Year's Eve, we had 2 people on. Christmas Eve, we had 2 people on. We had to do some creative funding in order.
It was just me. Oh, they're back.
Coming back.
All right, let's reshare this if I can.
So as we can see up here, oh, we just lost it from Dave. Dave's picture had it up for a minute. We know we're going to have to get some additional staffing. We need to get back up to a 4-person or a 6-person crew in the station in order to be able to respond
Just
an
not
engine
everybody's
and a
back up.
rescue, especially if we have
Yeah, you
concurrent
have to hit that
calls.
return to meeting button at the top.
So I guess
I
we're
see several people in the
We
call
want to
back in,
maintain our
but
current
not
response
all
times.
necessarily.
Actually, we want to improve our response times. We want to alleviate the shortages that we've been having over the last year. We're looking to prepare for a future retirement, some succession planning. This all plays a role in what we need to do over the next few years. So this isn't a surprise for anybody. We've talked about this for years. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
So when we take a look at some proposed staffing solutions, hiring additional personnel, lieutenants, anywhere from 2 to 7 full-time firefighters, some additional paid on-call shifts, you can see what the cost averages could be over on the left side of the screen, anywhere from $850,000 to $1.3 million. Go ahead, Dave. When we take a look at the station and the apparatus, with our comparables, we have 1 station. All of our comparables have 2 or more. Go ahead, Dave. We know that we were built back in 1992 with a bond by the vote of the people. We haven't asked for money from the people for 30 years. There's 3,100 new homes compared to 1992 that we have to protect. There's 500 additional homes coming in that we know of that we have to protect. We know there's more residents. We have more traffic. We have more stuff going on within the city. We're seeing about a 7.7% increase in call volume last year over 2020. And we're going to continue to see that rise. Go ahead, Dave. This is a conceptual design we had of a fire station when we did our planning, and we looked at our feasibility study. This was a conceptual design. Go ahead, Dave. We worked with a architect to come up with a design of the building. 3 bays, living quarters, office space. It's about a 10,000 square foot building versus the 28,000 that we have at our current station. So this is our design concept, and we're pretty happy with this design. So this is what we'd be looking to build. Go ahead, Dave. And we look at the operating expenses as far as utilities, repair and maintenance costs, vehicle replacement reserves, what kind of money we were looking at, a bond payment of about $438,000 on a $6 million bond to build the fire station. Go ahead, Dave. Of course, that's what our current station looks like. We've got some darn good-looking vehicles. You know, people are surprised when they look at our ladder truck and it's a 1992. It's been well maintained. As you all know, it recently got refurbished at Seagraves, and they were just impressed with the look of our ladder truck. Go ahead, Dave. And one thing we'd like to purchase is a Quint. We get deficiency points. We have a ladder truck, but we don't have a reserve ladder truck. So we get deficiency points from Survey and Rating Bureau. So the Quint would handle as being an additional pumper, a medical unit, and a ladder truck. We can get credit for all 3 of those utilizing 1 vehicle. They're expensive, about $1.2 million. But that's the apparatus that would be parked over at the Station 82 over on Swantown or in that neighborhood somewhere. Go ahead, Dave. And just talks a little bit about the Quint. And it's going to replace one of the 1998 pumpers. And then eventually we need to replace the other 1998 pumper. And you can see the breakdown of the cost for the Quint over a 12-year loan and a 9-year loan over a new engine. Go ahead, Dave. And this is kind of some cost breakdowns. And I think you're going to talk more about cost breakdown a little bit later on. Are you not, Dave?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, we're definitely going to go over this, but there's a couple options. The original option that was presented at when we presented this at a workshop in August of 2021 had 2 new firefighters and 2 new lieutenants, and there's options to look at going to 4 or going to 7.
So that's stuff we're going to look at more in depth. Okay, next one, Dave. And I am done.
Great.
I think I probably took all of your time too, Captain. Any
Well,
questions that
before we go on to the police, it is 3 o'clock, and I know the mayor wanted to keep us on schedule. I predict we're probably going to need another 20 to 25 minutes further. We could come back at the next workshop and continue, or we could continue right now. It's really up to what the mayor and the council want to do.
Fairly up to the council. They're fine. So go ahead to continue now.
All right, thank you. I think Captain Bailey is available to go over some of these slides.
Councillor Hoffmeyer.
Yeah, real quick before we move on. Thank you, Chief. One of the things with this that I'll be asking myself, and I think all of council will be, is what does it take to do the right thing? What is the potential and inevitable cost of not doing so? This is something that we have to get to. As a taxpayer, it surprises me that the decision was made in the past to ask the public for money to patch potholes when we've known how long this has been an issue. But that doesn't alleviate the current council from having to make the right decisions as we work through this. One of the things that really surprises me with response times, your response times they're based off of responding from the station, I guess, if you will. Say the fire department had to respond to a call at Crescent Harbor Elementary, and then there's a need to get to Howard Point, or say the new school that it looks like the school district will be building at Fort Nugent Park. Pretty baffling. We seen what that fire looked like after 4 minutes. That was a couple blocks away from my house. I can't imagine what that fire would look like after 15 minutes, but I think Chief could probably speak to that.
Yeah, and that's something we are concerned about. And again, with our staffing, when we only have a 3-person engine company and we are what we would consider out of position, away from our station, and if we were at Crescent Harbor Elementary and we needed to get to the far southwest section of town, even if we call mutual aid from NAS, if they're available, and North Whidbey, if they're able to provide mutual aid, which is not a requirement that they have to, we just merely ask for it, we're easily looking at a 15-minute response time, and depending on how quickly some of our paid on-call can get into the station in order to respond, if they're available as well. So we could be looking at some very extended response times.
Okay, thank you, Chief. We'll just continue then with Mr. Goldman. Okay. Sorry, we're going to Captain Bailey. Welcome.
Captain Mike, here we go.
Mayor and council. I'm here on behalf of the Oak Harbor Police Department for Chief Dresker. He's currently out of town on a prior engagement, looking at some important training equipment for the police department. So I'll go through about a half dozen slides. If there's any questions, then I'll answer them. So go ahead, David. So this is a brief synopsis of kind of the history of the police department. The police station was a small area located in the Oak Harbor City Hall. It used to be the City Hall back in the 1950s. Also ended up being part of it used to be where our jail currently is, and the training room area was the old fire station back in the late 50s. The police station consisted of a very small area attached to the fire hall, and a portion of that was used by the court to hold hearings. The location in these buildings are the foundation of the current police station and ICOM, who leases from the city. Back in the early 50s, it wasn't uncommon for the police chief to just respond from home and wouldn't even come into the office. Go ahead, David. In 1972, a major remodel was done. This made the police station a modern working department. In 79, another remodel was done, and then the last third one was done, and which was the latest one, was done in 1989, which is its current structure today. Go ahead, David. As you can see, one of the things that this public safety would do for the police department is you can see the red square there. That is To the right is our main police station. To the left is where we consider our training room. ICOM is just in front of that. And in order to go over to that area of the police department, we actually have to go either out through the front of our main lobby or through the night lobby, which is located by our old jail, in order to go in there. So it's basically two separate buildings. We're just not adjoined unless we walk out front and go to that. Where the yellow square is, that is our old jail facility, and we'll have some pictures of the old jail and the space that we have back there that's just not being utilized because it's an old jail that we do not use. Go ahead, David. So this is the exterior up top of how it looks for the outside of the front of the police department. You can see the main on the left top picture is the main entrance into the police department. All the way to the left would be the night entrance, and then over even more, just outside the picture, is that other building that I was talking about that we use for our training. The bottom left picture is actually the interior of our night lobby entrance. That would be utilized when we had full-time jail staff and a jail. You know, we'd be releasing inmates through there, or people would come in to, you know, get inmates or do visitations with inmates in that space. To the right, on the jail interior in the middle, that is what we call our, at the time when we had a full jail in operation, it was called our control center. And inside that was basically all our booking stuff for the corrections officers to use at the time of the jail. And they would work from that particular area or workstation. To the bottom right, that's what we call our booking counter. And just beyond that, you see the two gray doors in the back next to the wood door there. Those would be the cells. One would be a female cell that holds 4 inmates when we had the jail in operation. And to the right, there's 3 jail cells for males as well, which we do not use anymore. The booking counter, which is where you see the computer, we occasionally use that if somebody comes in and needs to be fingerprinted or something like that. Go ahead, David. So in regards to the front, this here particular is the inside of the jail. So the top right one is the hallway of the jail, and you can see on the right there are 2 jail cells. And then on the far back there's another jail cell, and of course you see the bunks on the bottom and everything. Front addition, you know, is approximately like $500,000, interior model $200,000, and then it would end up taking all what we have inside there and turning it into space that can be utilized for the department, obviously, because we do not utilize those cells anymore. Go ahead, David. Operational equipment. So the operational equipment that we're looking at is the things you see there: a rescue vehicle, a Polaris, a drone, and a robot. Real brief, I'll just go over the rescue vehicle and the equipment real quick. Rescue vehicle can be used for a multitude of things. One is if you hope you never have to use it, but when you do have to use it, it is equipment that's invaluable to the police department. For instance, if somebody was in an active shooter situation, there were hurt people outside, which, you know, in the first responders, they call it like a hot zone. You got to get in there, you got to save this person. You got to utilize that rescue vehicle to get in there, be able to be covered for the officers to get out, put them in that vehicle to get them to safety. Same with an officer. If an officer got involved and got hurt into a shooting, you had to go into the hot zone, you could use the rescue vehicle to do that. The drone can be used for a multitude of things. You know, we had an armed robbery a couple of years back at one of the banks. It would have been ideal to use a drone because the person took off on foot, took off through apartment complexes, took off through woods. I mean, you name it, to where, you know, officer on foot can cover a certain amount of distances, but a drone can cover an awful lot in a short amount of time. And also, a drone can be definitely utilized with missing children. We do get calls from, students of young children walking off campus, or, they didn't show up at home, but they were walking this way. We could utilize a drone definitely to circle a bigger area and look for that particular missing child. The robot is something that the police department can definitely use on a multitude of things. One, if you have like a barricaded subject, maybe down the hall in a building, we know that somebody's down there, but we don't want to send any officers down there because, it could put the officers in an extreme dangerous position to where you could utilize a robot to go down, has a camera, you could sit back behind a, cover and control the robot in order to see exactly what that particular suspect may be doing. Also, it can be used for suspicious packages, which we do get calls for those quite a bit, where somebody will say, man, somebody just walked by here, you had a backpack, you dropped it on the front porch of our building, we don't know what it is, we don't know who he is, we'd like you to come and check that out. So that's something that we could definitely stay back, let the robot go in and take a closer look rather than walking up on it and finding out that it could be something that you don't want. The Polaris, that's an electrical vehicle, and the Polaris would be utilized for things that we can't really drive up on in a normal vehicle. For instance, a Polaris could be used for up in the parks. It could be used going up Friend Marsh, trails up there, those type of areas that a normal vehicle can't go to. Or you could go there by foot, but it might take you a little while longer. And if you ended up going into the wooded area of a park or something, and it just so happens that maybe the person has a warrant that you're up there looking for, well, it's much easier to transport somebody back in that instead of just walking them out. Go ahead, David. So personnel, a couple of years ago, I think it is now, we did a reorganization with the jail and ended up taking, some of our corrections officer had already left during this time, and we transitioned from corrections staff to what we call a police support officer now. And during that transition, we had ended up doing two patrol officers because of the reorganization of the personnel. And one of those, with the reorganization of the jail, was funded through that. However, the second one did not have a sustainable financial cost for that particular position. So that's what this would go towards. And go ahead, David. This is just some financial costs up there that David will be hitting more on in regards to the three different things that I had discussed.
All right. Thank you, Captain Bailey.
Okay.
So now,
We got a question here. Councilor Stuckey?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to be a little cynical, and I apologize. When dealing with dollars, obviously we need to separate the wants from the needs, right? As someone who is not a police officer, I look at a rescue vehicle, seems more like a want, and I look at that part in the front area. I can understand it's an inconvenience to go outside of one building into another. It seems like a want as well, but it's not what I do. Are there's of the things you listed, some things are a more higher priority than others? Or are you saying, man, we need every single thing on this list?
No, I think it's fair to say there would be a itemized priority in regards to the list. Where the chief would put that priority, I couldn't speak for him, but yes, most definitely.
and also keep in mind for the new council members, when we presented this back in August of 2021, the list was larger. It was about 1.5 million a year. And we looked at different options. We went to a couple of additional workshops with the city council just to talk about the police service side of the public safety level service improvement program. and we were able to bring it down to either the level that you see with that equipment and with that one employee at $186,000 a year on the average, or with this option to do the expansion remodel, which would bring it to 303.
Yes, Councillor Hoffmeyer.
Captain Bailey, would you be able to speak to the increased service and increased, I guess, safety of the corridor they're connecting the two?
You mean connecting the, at the police department, collecting that? So, interesting you mentioned that. We, obviously, not too long ago, we just had a guy bust out one of our windows over at the police department. He was pounding on that night lobby door trying to get in for some odd reason. We had him on surveillance video. We were able to see that. And so that particular part, the night lobby, people go there, and it's not the main lobby, so they'll be going there knocking on the door. Well, nobody's there. So it's kind of confusing to the public, but definitely walking over there for police, not necessarily a safety issue, but from our records to go over there for those that are non-commissioned that aren't, necessarily, aware of any circumstances like that one gentleman I told you about. This happens about one in the morning, but if it would have happened earlier and one of our record staff was walking over there, it wouldn't have been good. They have been confronted a couple times trying to walk over to that additional building. When they're walking over there, people sometimes will be coming and just, confronting them or anything else. Not always bad or anything, but there has been some times where that has happened.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being able to answer that. And when David Goldman said that list had already been pared down, I'm like, well, maybe this is more than one.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Bailey.
Thank you, Mayor.
Appreciate it. Okay, we'll turn back to Mr. Goldman.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So I'll go over some of the funding methods and options that are available to fund these initiatives. The three major funding methods I'll be going over are the levied lid lift, which affects property taxes, an excess levy, which also affects property taxes, and a public safety sales tax. So a levied lid lift. So this would permit an increase over the 1% lid up to the statutory maximum levy rate. And I'll be going over what these things mean in a few slides from now. But basically, every year, the City Council can increase the levy, the property tax levy, by 1%. Usually inflation's way over 1%, and in the years where it's over 1%, we're still limited to that 1%. In order to go over that 1%, what's called a levied lid lift, you would have to go to the voters, and the voters would have to approve it. It would be a majority vote, 50% plus one would have to approve a levied lid lift, and you could go up to what's called the statutory maximum rate. So there's different flavors of lid lifts. You have a single-year lift, which is the most common one that's passed throughout the state of Washington. There's also a multi-year lift. There's some differences between the two. With a single-year lift, you could put it on pretty much any election, but if you're using a multi-year lift, you can only put it on the primary and general election. Levied lid lifts are most commonly used for ongoing operational costs such as payroll, utilities, maintenance, replacement reserves, and they're not commonly used for debt service, because if they're used for debt service, the maximum amount of time the lid lift can be in effect would be 9 years. So now the statutory maximum levy that I mentioned before is the highest rate a city can levy without going to an excess levy. So normally a city would be limited to 3.6. The levy rate would be at 3.6, but because we're in the Snow Isle Library District, their rate is subtracted out of the 3.6, bringing our maximum down to 3.176. Our current rate is 1.8232, which is substantially lower than 3.176. Now that 1.8232 raises about $4.6 million a year. And voters can approve a rate right up to 3.176 with a majority vote, and that would raise an additional $3.4 million, which won't be needed for what we talked about earlier. That would just be the maximum. So an excess levy is a little different. That permits increases over that statutory maximum levy rate. In order to do an excess levy, you'd have to have a supermajority of the voters approve the ballot initiative, and that would mean 60% plus one. And also, you'd have to do this validation, which I'll go over in a few slides from now. The primary purpose of an excess levy is to pay back long-term capital debt. So they're usually used in order to pay back bonds. And they can only be used for new capital projects and vehicles. They cannot be used for replacement vehicles. The benefits of an excess levy is it provides a stable revenue stream that's automatically sized each year to pay back that debt. And once the debt has been repaid, the excess levy ceases, it just goes away. And that excess levy ballot can be put on any election, special, primary, or general election. So speaking of validation, in order to have one of these be approved by the voters, by the 60% supermajority of voters, the turnout in the election, if it's a special election, has to be at least 40% compared to the most recent general election. We went back in time over the last 10 years and took a look at what the turnout was for special elections compared to the previous general election. And in every one that we found, the turnout would have passed the validation test. The third option is a public safety sales tax. According to the RCW, 1/3 of revenues must be used for criminal justice or fire protection or both. This would have to be approved by city voters. It would be 1/10 of 1 cent or 0.1% sales tax. It would be shared. 1% would go to the state, and then the remainder, 85%, would come to Oak Harbor, 50% would go to the county. And that would raise about $450,000 a year, which is less than the costs that we went over in the previous slides. In addition, the county voters can adopt the same sales tax, and that sales tax can go up to 0.3 of a cent. Now that must be shared based on a formula adopted by the state. 1% goes to the state, 60% would go to the county, and 40% would go to cities and towns based on a formula, based on a population-based formula. If the county adopted this, Oak Harbor would get, if they did a 1/10, would get about 500,000. If they did a 2/10, it would be $1 million, and if they did a 3/10, it would be 1.5. And a majority vote requirement is required in either a primary or a general election. So to recap, you have a levy lid lift. That's ideal for operating costs. You have an excess levy, which is ideal for debt service for long-term general obligation debt. And you have the public safety sales tax, which is ideal for partial funding of ongoing expenses, but the amount is insufficient to fund all items that we went over before. So based on that, we put together 3 options. Option 1 is a combination levy lid lift for the operational and staffing costs, and an excess levy for the fire station and Quint ladder truck. Under this option, the land purchase and project design would start in 2023, and construction would start in 23 and 24. Option 2 would just have a levy lid lift. It would fund the police operational costs that we went over before, and it would save the money raised by the levy lid lift for the fire needs. And once we had sufficient funding, then we could go ahead and start construction. Under that option, you can do the land purchase and project design in 23, but you'd have to wait a couple more years to get enough money to be able to start the construction on the project. That would delay the project a couple of years. And option 3 would be the sales tax. So here are the charts combined, what we went over before. You can see in fire, broke out the different components of the fire level of service request. We have the employee payroll. This is with 2 firefighters, 2 lieutenants, and there's additional shifts for the paid on calls. We have some PPE, uniforms and computers, some equipment there. We have operating expenses. We have payments on a quint and an engine. And then we have the bond payments, which would be on the fire station. And the total for that, and what I did was I took an average over 6 years. The average over 6 years for that first, those first items is 1.65 million a year. Now, there are options to add additional firefighters to those 2 firefighters, adding 2 more to make 4 firefighters. We add another $192,000 on the average, and adding 3 more would add another $318,000 for a total of $2.16 million for fire. For police, that 1 police officer that we talked about, plus those 4 items in the equipment, would be that's about $50,000 a year. Together, that would be $186,000 a year. And if you add in the expansion remodel that we had discussed, on the average, that's about $117,000 a year. So altogether, for the police scenario, that would be about $303,000 a year. So you can see, depending on the options chosen, the average annual cost is either 1.8 or $2.46 million a year. And that is reduced from what we did present to the City Council in August. The total package in August was $3.1 million. So the question is, how does that relate to the average home, to the average taxpayer? So I put this chart together, and it's pretty busy, but this is option 1 with the two items, the levy lid lift and the excess levy. I updated all these numbers per the information from Island County that came out a few weeks ago. That's our assessed value, the city's assessed value for all the property in the city of $2.5 billion. The statutory limit, I mentioned before, it was reduced because of the library, so it's 3.17. When you multiply that together, you get a total of about $8 million. That would be the maximum you could do with an excess levy. Right now, the city brings in $4.6 million, and the levy rate is 1.8232. The average impact to the average homeowner, based on the assessed value information provided by Island County, is about $575 a year, or $48 a month. Now, as far as the options go and the equipment goes, here is the fire staff and equipment with the 2 firefighters and the 2 lieutenants, and those paid on calls. Here's 2 additional firefighters, and here's 3 additional firefighters on top of that. Here's your replacement engine. Here's the payments over 9 years. Here's the amount for police staff and equipment, and this is for the police station remodel. So the total in the levied lid lift, which requires a 50% vote, would be $1.9 million a year. The impact would be an additional, and this is additional over the 575, an additional $237 a year, or about $20 a month. Now here's the excess levy. This is to pay back the debt. If we went to an excess levy, it would be for a general obligation bond to pay back a 20-year bond for the station and a loan for the Quint ladder truck. Together, that's about $565,000. The impact to the average homeowner, the average household, is $71 a year or $6 a month. So taken together, the current levy plus these options, all the options, would bring the tax bill, the City of Oak Harbor portion of the tax bill, to $882 a year, or $73.51 a month, which is about $25 or $26 more a month than it currently is. Now that's option 1. Option 2 would be to put everything under the levy lid lift. Now the overall bottom line numbers are the same. It's 882 there, it's 882 here, 7351 here, 7351 there. The only difference is we're not going out for a bond, going to a 60% vote for an excess levy. What we're doing is we're saving. We're not increasing the fire level of service right away. We're saving this money, the $1 million every year. And if this is decided, we'll save these 2 every year, and we'll save this money every year until we have enough money built up where we can go ahead and construct the station. Now this is approved, we can go buy the land, we have some preliminary design, we can do further engineering and get everything ready. But until we have sufficient funding, we can't really move forward to, with full construction. Option 3 are the sales tax scenarios. So I mentioned the city or the county can impose a sales tax. If the city of Oak Harbor voters decided to impose a sales tax, of course, 1% goes to the state, and the rest of this is split 85-15. Of course, the state percentage throw this off a little bit, but this would bring in about $450,000 a year for the city of Oak Harbor. If the county voters decided to impose the sales tax to the whole county, Oak Harbor's share would be about the same, about $50,000 more than if our voters did it alone. But they can go up to 0.3. So if they decided to go to 0.2, this is the number. And if the voters decided to do a 0.3, this would be the approximate amount that the city of Oak Harbor would get from that sales tax. So are there any questions on any of the numbers or the levy lid lifts or the property taxes or anything before we move on to potential timing?
Yes. Councillor Hoffmeyer has a question.
It may be that I'm missing it here. Option 3, when would construction be able to commence with option 3?
Well, if we did option 3, and it would depend on the county voters, of course, but if the county voters approved a 0.3 cent sales tax, it would depend in part as to the option that the city council would choose here. Because if the city council says, let's go ahead and do this, let's not do these two these additional firefighters, let's do the police stuff, and let's stay for the station. I mean, you could see that the 1.5 million I just showed you is not enough. It's, the total is 2.5. If we cut some of this out, it would bring it down to 1.9, maybe one. It would just not be enough for the 1.5 million. Now, if we decided, if the county did that, they did the 1.5 million, and we funded the police right here at 300,000, you'd have another 1.1, 1.2 million left over. You can save that. I mean, once we get to about $6 million, be about 5 years, maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 years before you can go ahead and do the station under that scenario.
Thank you, Dave. I have a question for Chief Merrill as well. You're the one that's there every day, right? You had mentioned the 500 new houses, and a school being built in the southwest quadrant. What does waiting another 4 years for a station look like? Does the ISO rating raise to 6? Does it raise beyond? And roughly, do you have any ballpark on how much that pushes up homeowners insurance, for instance?
Good question. Probably could be a long answer, but I'll try to make it as brief as possible. Every year that we push this out. Now, one thing I talked with, let me back up a little bit. I talked with Survey and Rating Bureau, and we were talking about if we went to A5, which is the potential. And the gentleman I spoke to, Daryl, said that he actually watched the video that I did to the council back in August, I believe it was. And he said, how'd you come up to that conclusion? And I told him that when we looked at what the requirements were in 2013, we haven't met their recommendations. We don't meet the ISO ratings. And I said that I would truly anticipate that we would potentially go to a 5, if not a 6, because of our travel distance, our response time, and our lack of staffing. And when I talked with insurance companies, they said going from a 4 to a 5 wouldn't be that detrimental. And I pause on the word that. Depends on which insurance company you talk to and whether or not they are a huge corporation and self-insured, if it's a homeowner's insurance. One insurance company I talked with says, well, it depends on your crime rate, it depends on your claim rate, it depends on claims that come in on an annual basis, all plays a role in fire insurance rating. A lot of them said if you go from a 4 to a 6, you could anticipate a 25% increase in your insurance rating. 4 to a 6 is a big jump. That's a detrimental jump. if we look at holding off onto 2025 or 2026 or even 2027, that's going to be detrimental as far as insurance rating go. When I talked to the guy at Survey and Rating Bureau, he said, well, what we could do and not impose your rating, and if you were going to go out for bonds and levies in November, we would wait and see what happened at the bond and levy time. If they passed, we would hold off on changing your rating until, if you even had to change, until after we saw what your plan was going to be. In essence, if we do nothing and nothing is to happen, then if we got rated at a 5 or a 6, then that would go into effect. If we passed a bond and a levy and we started construction and we started hiring people, they would take that into consideration before they would ever issue the finding as far as what the new rate is. And if they said that, hypothetically, if you were able to have enough career staff or staffing and you got your response times down, then we would not raise your rating from a 4 to a 6. We would keep it at the 4. So there are some give and takes in this. But I was surprised how workable Survey and Rating was going to be when we talked about our potential plan if this was to go to the voters in 2022 and if it got passed. If it doesn't pass, then whatever our rating is what it's going to be for the next 5 years, 5 to 7 years. So if we went from a 4 to a 6, potentially you could see that for the next 5 to 7 years until we're re-rated again.
You know, at that point, I think the average homeowner, the average taxpayer could be looking at giving $300 to $400 a year to their insurance company, as opposed to spending a couple $100 to make us safer. So it'll certainly be part of what I use to evaluate this. Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Okay, Councillor Evans.
Hey, Chief. So a bunch of the new homes that we have coming in are going to be sprinklered, is my understanding. What does that do to your response time in this rating?
Well, good question, Mr. Evans. The reason for the sprinkling systems is because of the fire code, the International Fire Code, as far as travel distance inside of the complex, angles of inclination inside of the complex, grade levels that we have to go up. When you look at the fire code, it says that you can only have a grade of 15%. And if you don't, then you have to be able to mitigate that because of apparatus travel up a 15% grade or greater. When we look at dead-end roads or separations between structures, the sprinkling system gets you some allowances on hydrant location, hydrant spacing, dead ends, and angles of inclination into the property and turning radiuses within the property. So it's not going to change anything on insurance ratings as far as the fire insurance rating goes. Now, insurance companies we have seen have had different fire ratings for houses that are sprinkled. But not all insurance companies offer that either.
Thank you. Anyone else? One last question. Is this your candy, Chief?
I cannot tell a lie, Mayor. It very well could be, but I will not confirm nor deny. Don't look at the white bag on the table.
If you know who to thank, thank him. Okay, Mr. Goldman, back to you.
All right. So timing. So our experience with talking to a few other cities and actually working for a few other cities that went through public safety, levies and ballot initiatives shows that ensuring sufficient time for outreach, education, and feedback is essential so the public understands what they're voting for when time comes around for them to vote. So due to that, staff suggested that the 2022 general election be tentatively scheduled for the ballot measures. Any one of these different items, they could all go on a general election, so it wouldn't be an issue whichever one the city council decides to go with. Here's something I pulled from an MRSA guide. It's a guide from last year, so some of these dates may have passed, but you can see that there's a filing deadline. So for the 22 general, you'll see that August 2nd is the filing deadline. The election's, November 8th. And then if it's approved, the funds will start coming in on April 1st. So, yeah, that'll give us a decent amount of time to do the outreach and provide the information to the public. And actually, Sabrina's here to talk about a preliminary plan that we have set up to go ahead and focus on and talk to folks out in the community. So, Sabrina, take it away.
Thanks, David. Generally speaking, the plan is that we've been monitoring other communities, ones that we participated with, or ones that we're seeing happen, and seeing some different ways that we can engage with our audiences and using the tools that we have, as well as some additional measures to really engage with the audience and make them aware of the program. So I would be working closely with the team, and we would be developing content that would allow our local voters to know what they were voting for, why they should vote for it, and give them that information to look at. We are also, as you know, currently working on a website improvement, and so that will give us more feasibility in being able to connect with the audience as well and put that information on the front page of the website so they can access it in a much easier fashion.
All right, thank you. Thank you again. So that's all we have for now. So I guess what we'll do is we'll ask the City Council for maybe some thoughts on that November 8th election, and maybe some thoughts on if we think we should be doing the sales tax, or maybe the levied lid lift, or the combination levied lid lift excess levy, or maybe they just want us to provide more information and maybe a more specific, detailed presentation, so they can make a more informed decision. It's really up to the council to give us direction on where to go from here.
So I know we've got at least one question here from Mr. Stuckey. So if I heard you correctly, you're hoping that this council today can give you some at least preliminary thoughts. That's what you're looking for at this point, Mr. Goldman?
Correct.
Okay. I'll turn to Councilor Stuckey.
So, certainly it sounds like a lot of this is needed and necessary. Of course, we got to look at both sides. And it's always, we always talk about affordability and affordable housing. And then, with the exception of the sales tax, this is in direct opposition to affordable housing. You're talking about $73 more a month or so. My first question is, well, we don't want to keep kicking things down the road, as has always happened. Is right this year, do we think this has good odds of passing, considering we just are talking about the 1.1% for affordable housing? We're talking about the school bond. Is this a year we think that this could go through? I mean, I know no time is ideal, but do we think we have good odds this year with everything else going on as far as tax dollars go?
Good question. So, Mr. Olborn, are you?
Yeah, David, I'll field that question because I was here when we did the TBD, Transportation Benefit District Sales Tax. We didn't do a lot of advertising on it, and I think we got generated 54%. So I think the odds are really good. I think staffing strategy is we really want a commitment earlier for the November so we can start the education process, because we can't campaign, but we could certainly educate people on it and help them in the decision. And I think some of the key components were already talked about here, as opposed to if we don't continue to adequately fund our fire department, then your possibility of you're paying for it instead of taxes, you're paying for it with your increased insurance on your house, your fire insurance. So there's certainly a correlation there. So that's the plan we're looking for. Option 3 is not fully funded, and we really can't control what the county can do on the sales tax issue. We can do a blend of option 3 and the other ones. Probably the one that staff, we put it in order, so option 1 would probably be the recommendation. We scaled it back. We're going to have to determine what level of fire department we scaled back. I really would want to add another officer in there for the police department, but I think we can squeeze that out of the budget. But we utilized fund balance for that last one, so I think it's really critical to stay at the same level to get secure funding for this. And I always talk about the pie issue because the chief hits me up and says, Blaine, I want 4 officers, I want 4 firefighters in the budget. And I'm thinking, well, if I don't grow the pie, how do I do that? We're not able to grow the pie with the 1%. So there's a natural evolution, and all our sister cities are all doing this in order to get by because they can't raise it at the level. And then why didn't we do this earlier? Honestly, there was some reservation from previous staff that didn't think we had the capacity, but bringing in new staff brought in new ideas and got it confirmed, and it was talked about here that we do have the capacity to put that on, but that was part of the reason why this was kicked down and not brought forward in the future. So what we're looking for is direction, and we certainly really need council approval and understanding of this, of what level option it is, but I think that's a key component, having a unity of council that wants to put this forward to the voters and helps us to educate the voter on this. And so this is a little bit different than the county sales tax we talked about, because this one we're not talking about you guys making the decision, we're talking about the voters making the decision.
And I like the idea of the vote. I mean, we can always ask. Voters can always say no. It's not us. It's the voters, and I appreciate that. And these 2 options I'm looking at, if I understand correctly, you have the levy lift, and you have the 20-year excess levy. One's a majority, one's a supermajority. What does it look like if one goes through but the other doesn't?
We would
Well,
have
we'd end
to.
up with we'd end up with the levied lid lift funding, but we just wouldn't have the money for the station. So what we'd have to do is decide, I mean, we have to follow the will of the voters, and we have to make sure we structure the ballot language so that it's flexible enough to take that into consideration. So we might, so if it's flexible enough, what we might end up doing is saving what we can up until we have enough to go ahead and do a station, and maybe we find a different funding source to make up the difference to move the station up a little bit in the years, because this would be asking for $565,000 less in this levied lid lift, so we'd have to come up with some additional funding if we were to put this money away for a few years to build the station. But we do have to follow the will of the voters, so the ballot language is real important that we make sure it's worded so we have flexibility.
Thank you.
Councilor Evans.
Chief, I have a question for you from Mayor Pro Tem Munns. She inquires, what if we only hired more firefighters but waited on the station? Then the public would be paying for manpower and not have to pay for both of them right away. How would that affect you?
Well, how do I best answer this one? It will not change our response times because the distance is still the same. We're still at 3.5 miles out to the furthest point out from our current location. The difference would be is we would have more staffing available, so if there was subsequent calls, we could at least get 2 vehicles out the door versus 1 today. So it is a benefit, but it doesn't necessarily address the entire problem, because the entire problem says that we've got that 1.5 mile radius that Survey and Rating Bureau and NFPA 1710 both recognize as our travel distance area. And when we look at the times at the 4 minutes, again, with the location of our current station on Whidbey Avenue, you go north all the way to Altfield Road where our property is, because we've got businesses all the way on Altfield Road now that we service. We have a school out at Crescent Harbor that is within our boundaries that we take care of, and we respond to that. So we look at the distance that we would potentially have to travel. Again, if we left the station, we're at 3.5 miles to get out to Fairway Point, Howard's Point, that whole southwest quadrant. So the travel distance remains the same. The travel time would potentially remain the same. We would just have more apparatus to be able to respond to multiple calls by having additional staff.
So the key is the station.
It's kind of a 2-part thing. We need the station, but we need people to put in the station. If we get the people, that's great, because that is a benefit, that is a plus to us. But eventually we do need that station to park the apparatus in.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Councilor Hoffmeyer.
The last levy that I would have been involved in would have been 2018. That would have been for the pool, obviously. 75% support in city limits. Firemen are pretty universally loved. it will pass. You know, I'm only one of 6 right now, soon to be one of 7, right? My opinion would be, it seems like option 1 would be our only option on the table. And I think it's very important that it's been mentioned several times that we're not sitting here raising taxes, we're sitting here putting it to a vote of the people. And I think that is a pretty good way to represent the public.
You know, and I think one thing that's of interest, we have not asked the community for bonds or levies for 30 years. That was the last time we did it was back in 1989. So we have tried to be self-sufficient as much as possible and been prudent with money.
Well, I've got to tell you, Chief, that, you know, you and I have worked together now for pretty close for 6 years, and we definitely have kicked that can down the road. There's no question about it. You've been very patient, and you found a way to keep us safe in spite of it. So I can't tell you enough how thankful I am, and I know that when I voted for you for our chief, I just still feel as strong as I did on that day that if my house is on fire, I want somebody like you with your knowledge and your energy to be there working on put it out. And I think you've got a lot of guys that you're working with that are trying to do that same thing. So thank you very much. And we got a tough decision here. Councilor Evans.
I would just like to repeat what I said at the last city council meeting, that, you know, our job as a city, the primary focus is public safety, and that's what both of you guys are providing for us. So, yeah, we're definitely going to look at this and see what we can do to get it resolved. So, thank you, guys.
I don't know that we've answered your question, Mr. Goldman. I guess that, you know, we're still wanting to look at the numbers. I still will want to see, make sure I understand them myself too. So with that said, will we plan on bringing this to council at a particular meeting? And if so, when?
We'll have to discuss that, whether we bring it up as an informational item at a regular council meeting or again at the next workshop. But Blaine did say, and I've experienced this myself working for other cities, the more time we have to get out to the public and educate them and provide them information as to what the current level of service is and what the potential of level of service could be and how that would affect them, how that would improve public safety. And also make sure they understand how also it would affect their pocketbook. You know, that would be beneficial, because if we wait until August and then decide to do it by that deadline, it doesn't really provide a whole lot of time to get out there and educate folks. One last thing, I think someone mentioned before that this will cost like $74 a month. Just so you know, there's a lot of numbers. It's kind of confusing when you first look at it. But right now, people are paying $48 a month, and everything, including these additional firefighters and some of the other options, everything it will end up costing about $25.63 a month more than the 48. So, you know, it's about 50% of what they currently pay.
Thanks for clarifying that too. That's helpful.
Sure.
Okay.